Many worry that the illegal drug will lead to even more addiction problems.
There are many of these people that use marijuana for medical purposes. People that use medicine aren't necessarily drug addicts.
There certainly are many people who try marijuana and decide that they enjoy it and continue to use it. But of course you could say the same thing about zillions of people's use of ice cream or addiction to exercise or downhill skiing or whatever. So addiction can be way too broad a concept.
No matter what side of the issue you're on, do consider that it is certainly within the interest of groups and companies across the country to keep this drug illegal.
I think some people think that it's wrong morally or ethically or religiously or something. Okay? I think there are significant interest groups that benefit from current policy, from continuing prohibition. So some parts of law enforcement clearly would lose their jobs if marijuana, other things were made legal. So they have a personal stake in continuing current policy.
The pharmaceutical industry, which doesn't want a plant to be available as an alternative medicine.
The treatment sector gets a lot of its business from the fact that drugs are illegal, because a lot of people refer to treatment because they're arrested. Whether you think that's true or not, it clearly is in the interest of the treatment sector, and so they also are a factor in maintaining the status quo.
Fourth group are the politicians, the ones who get elected and re-elected by talking tough with regard to the war on drugs.
The liquor industry is opposed to it because they don't want people, they're worried about people using marijuana as an alternative to alcohol.
Obviously, the Mexican drug cartels, the big-time drug sellers, and they're winning, making tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, tax-free. They're coming out ahead. Predominant source of funding for all terrorist groups around the world is what? The sale of illegal drugs.
The only reason cannabis is not legal is, the number of jobs, if you add them up in law enforcement and prisons. How are we putting people in prison when our own federal government, Department of Health and Human Services, has the patent on this stuff? It's insanity.
What happens in Asia?
More than 20,000 people lost their lives when...
What happens in Europe?
On the streets of London, opinions are divided.
What happens in the Middle East?
At least one person was shot dead.
It all affects you here at home. Complete coverage, objective reporting. It's your world, and Wealth International News brings it to you. Nightly worldwide news.
They're the biggest, most luxurious, jaw-dropping, eye-popping homes in the world. And we're taking you inside. It's the privileged life of the elite like you've never seen before.
When I walked in, I couldn't speak for about 30 seconds. I was flabbergasted.
Whichever way you view it, or use it for that matter, marijuana is still a Scheduled I illegal substance at a federal level. At the state level, however, some are allowing the use under certain restrictions.
My advice as an attorney is don't get involved in this industry because you're going to be violating federal law. However, there are ways to comply with state law. The law states that patients can possess, transport, and cultivate for their own personal medical use. So right now, we're in this murky gray area that essentially states patients can possess an amount of marijuana reasonably related to their medical needs. Right now, as it stands, cultivation of marijuana is a felony. Even one plant that's 6 inches tall, you can be charged with a felony. The potential penalties for a felony for cultivation or possession with intent to sell are 16 months, 2 years, or 3 years in state prison.
If you were a patient here and I'm saying that you should take 2 sprays of this, 3 times a day, giving you specific instructions or telling you a list of places where you can get it is on a federal level aiding and abetting.
If you have a felony on your record, it's going to seriously impact your future.
You can recover from an addiction. What you cannot recover from is from a conviction.
Nationally, we have 2.4 million people behind bars, 1.7 million in prison, and 700,000 in jail. Of those, about 500,000 are for drug law violations, and of those, 30,000 are for marijuana violations.
So if we legalized marijuana only, the effect on prison overcrowding would be something, but it wouldn't be huge. There are not a ton of people in prison on marijuana charges.
In California, it costs $46,000 a year to incarcerate people. We only spend $8,000 per year on our students.
That could free up 30,000 inmates from our already overcrowded prison systems and could potentially save the government $1.38 billion that would have gone to incarcerating a marijuana conviction. On the other end of the spectrum, and not to advocate the idea, but several different countries have decriminalized all drug use.
A couple of countries recently that we've seen who are having positive results with regards to drug legalization and decriminalization would be Switzerland and Portugal.
In Portugal, 2001, they decriminalized all drugs. All drugs. What happened? Well, first of all, they found that drug usage remained the same. If anything, it went down like 0.2%. So by and large, it stayed the same. We can learn from the Portuguese experience. It's working.
Under this proposed decriminalized system, or even under a legal system, there is still always the concern for problematic drug use.
We cannot create laws that will keep people always from doing foolish things.
The doors will open to reveal the mysteries kept locked up in one of the most magnificent palaces ever built. A royal romance that transcended generations. A family scandal kept quietly in the dark. And a tragic story of a monarch caught in the midst of revolution. Join Wealth TV for an all-new episode of Castles of the Ages. It was an empire that was born on the battlefield, endured and flourished through centuries of war, and then suddenly collapsed. This is the tale of one of the most iconic civilizations ever to exist, whose profound influence on society still resonates to this day. This is the legacy left behind by the Roman Empire. You're watching Wealth TV.
With the United States racking up nearly $15 trillion in national debt, it's time to have an honest debate on what to do about our fiscal problems.
The current state of the economy, the U.S. had one of the largest recessions in its history. We have started to recover from that. That is, the recession officially ended, but growth has been relatively weak compared to most recoveries from recessions. I think there's a reasonable possibility of getting back to the pre-existing trend, but that would require fairly radical changes in policy, which politically are unlikely to happen.
One example of a radical change in policy could be the legalization of marijuana.
Two aspects of government budgets that will be affected by legalization. One is that we wouldn't be spending the money on arrests, on prosecutions, on incarcerations.
The second aspect is the U.S. would be able to collect tax revenue on legalized marijuana. And experts have estimated that $6.2 billion could be collected if we tax the substance at similar rates to tobacco and alcohol. For instance, the current price on a pack of cigarettes in New York City is nearly $11. More than half that elevated price is comprised of city, state, and federal taxes.
I would regulate marijuana like wine. In effect, Marijuana is the largest cash crop in the state of California today, and in many ways it's the largest cash crop in the United States. In California, the #2 crop, by the way, is grapes. So that tells me that somebody's using it. So instead of prohibiting it, which brings in the worst of all worlds, let's treat it like wine. Let's have a statewide organization, the Alcohol Beverage Control Board that governs wine, put in their enforcement and everything else. We lose more cash, more money from the United States of America because of drug prohibition than anything else other than oil. It's like people in a never-ending line pushing wheelbarrows full of $50 bills back into Mexico or Colombia or whatever. So that money could be saved.
I think if we legalize marijuana, that would mean having it be available to anyone who wants to purchase it for whatever use. So some would use it recreationally, some would use it medicinally. So I don't think we have to make that distinction at all if we fully legalize.
So there would be an age limit. Vendors would be licensed. Producers of the product would be licensed, and they would be, inspected and held to standards.
We should never assume that we can make things perfect. We're not going to have a complete absence of adverse things related to drugs, no matter what the policy is, just as we don't have an absence for alcohol. There are going to be some people who misuse, some people who drive under the influence, and so on.
Similarly to alcohol, there could also be consequences for people who choose to get behind the wheel while impaired.
Well, we have laws against driving under the influence of drugs already on the books in most places, so we can certainly have those. Now, the ability to test whether someone was driving under the influence or was under the influence is more difficult for some substances than others. For example, marijuana stays in one's system for more than just a few hours, so someone could have been smoking 2 days ago, get in a car, no longer under the influence at all, but still test positive for marijuana.
And I understand that now there's the test where you can actually swab the inside of your mouth and you can determine whether someone has actually smoked marijuana within the last 5 hours or so. So modern science will come to the rescue.
Under our current system for alcohol and tobacco sales, we do not see a violent black market style distribution associated with these sometimes addictive substances. If marijuana were to also become legal, this violent trend may subside.
So bringing the market above ground should eliminate a huge fraction of violence, which is mainly due to the illegal nature, not to the use of the substances per se. It eliminates the corruption because the reason for the corruption is the illegality. You don't see much corruption in legal markets. Nobody has any particular incentive.
Talk about Mexico, for example. More than 50,000 people have died a violent death in Mexico because of this war on drugs. Has nothing to do with drugs whatsoever. It has everything to do with drug money. The corruption, the violence, the killing is all a response to drug money. And by the way, it's our drug money that has done it. Shame on us.
Besides diminishing the harms associated with drug violence, another area of improvement is quality control.
Most of the harms are caused by the unknown strength and the unknown quality of the drugs, and that's critically important. When we had alcohol prohibition, we had what I called the bathtub gin effect, where you'd get a bad batch of the alcohol and it would attack your nervous system. A lot of people died, a lot were put into comas. That went away completely when we repealed alcohol prohibition.
I mean, there's no way there's not going to be battles. There's no way the pharmaceutical company is happy about this stuff because it's sold at like 1/8 to 1/10 the price.
I sort of think that it might change a lot under a sort of Nixon goes to China scenario, that a conservative Republican will come out for legalization. I think in some ways it's harder for a moderate or liberal Democrat to come out for it because those politicians are going to fear that if they do that, they're going to lose everybody in the middle. A second-term conservative might say, you know what, this is my sort of gift to the future. It's time to say that the emperor has no clothes on this issue.
I think it's inevitable that it will be legalized. We will look back on it the way we look at women's suffrage, segregation, gay rights, and we're going to wonder how could we have perpetuated such a failed system for so long.
Anyone who's watching this program should really just consider the cost to society of marijuana prohibition. Look at how much it's costing us in law enforcement, in prisons. So I think really what people should take away from this is that by regulating a substance such as marijuana, we can have much more control over it.
It's time for the U.S. and even the world to rethink the current drug policy. By prohibiting a plant, We are creating much more costs than benefit, and our nation can't afford it. It's time to change.